hello and welcome to section 10.2 of the book Transgender Ideology and Gender Dysphoria, a Catholic Response. This section is on medical professionals, the first step of the heuristic. If you're just finding this goes along with the book. The book is in the description. You can get an audio book, you can get a physical book, you can get a Kindle version, right? You can get whatever you would like. It might help in all of the data, statistics, and things like that. And the sources are all in the bibliography and in the text. So this is just a summary to help people go through. And I also know some people are never going to read the book, but they might YouTube it. So this might be helpful information for you as well. So we'll jump right into it. I think this will be part 1 of 2 because this is 23 slides and that's usually about almost 2 hours, so probably split it in half. So the first step of the heuristic, remember the heuristic is the steps we're taking to understand and to give a base rate heuristic, which means that science-based, fact-based judgment, right, and action, right? So the first step is to take good counsel, right? And this is very important. So if we're going to make any type of judgment from a place of parenting, teaching, civic responsibility, right? This is, I've already pointed this out, but I'll point it out again just for anyone who's just watched this one video. It's not proper to judge your neighbor, right? As Jesus has pointed out multiple times, it is not proper to judge your neighbor. And St. Thomas also points this out in terms of communitive justice. You know, two equals within a society are not to be one another's judge. That would be a usurping of power. But there are times in which when we should judge, right? When you are a parent, you should judge for your family. When you're a teacher, you should judge for your students. When you're a doctor, you should judge on issues of medical things for your patients. When you're a politician, you have to judge for the good of the populace, right? So there's many situations in where we must judge, right? If you don't judge, you are negligent, right? And there's many other times when we should not judge. So if you are in a position in which you ought to judge, right, then this is useful, right? If you are not in a position where you ought to judge, it's still useful to know the information, but it's our duty externally to be affable, right? Friendly, not to be judgmental, right? This is where Christians get themselves in trouble when they consider themselves the judges of everything rather than the friends, right? And sometimes we need to be the friends, and sometimes we need to be the judge, and sometimes the best friend is a judge, right? So, again, if you want to see any of that, you have to go back to other videos. I can't summarize the entire book up to this point. So, where does this good counsel come from? Well, the document, Male and Female, He Created Them, says, when a person's sex is not clearly defined, medical professionals can make the therapeutic intervention. In such situations, parents cannot make arbitrary choices on the issue, let alone society. So this is kind of a cut through, right? So when it comes to your youth or people in your life or your people you're making judgments for, if they are involved in gender ideology, then this is somewhat simple, right? You have to stick with good biological realism. You stick with, Catholic epistemology. You deal with proper judgments in terms of ideologies, right? Ideologies. If you were to say it's philosophical, well, philosophical perspectives can be debated and should be debated. And ultimately, we aim at the truth, right? This is the idea when you're dealing with ideology. Not to say people don't need to have some type of particular pastoral care. Sometimes you do, and you have to be nice in the way you debate and nice in the way we speak to one another. Is a little less safeguarding needed when it comes to philosophical perspectives, because somebody believes something, we don't have to protect their feelings in a special way just because they believe something, right? We should be able to have a conversation with people we disagree with, right? That's a whole nother topic. But when somebody's dealing with a medical condition, right? If somebody's dealing with gender dysphoria, if there's a biological or psychological cause of gender dysphoria, now we take that differently, right? We don't, if somebody has diabetes, we have a sensitivity there, right? The reason why they could be diabetic is because they are overweight. However, proper response isn't to go up and say, "Hey, you're fat, lose weight." Oh, this isn't helpful, right? If you are a doctor, though, and you're making proper judgment, you should instruct your patient, diabetes is terrible, and if you would like to beat this, I know there's different types of diabetes, but presuming it's health, it's weight-based, you need to lose so much weight, right? This is a consequence of your overweightness, right? You have to be nice, you have to be sensitive, you have to be caring, make it about them and their quality of life and about their relationship. It's not about you as a doctor, right? So there's ways of doing this, right? So it's always in a friendly way, but with the medical one, we have to be serious about the medical science, right? We don't want to conflate medical science with ideology, right? So Archbishop Carlson points out, and I think this is very helpful, he says in his pastoral letter, he says, "I ask Catholic hospitals, physicians, counselors, and their to use their expertise, fidelity, and creativity to discover and follow paths that can help, paths that are in accord with genuine Catholic understanding of the person." Now, this, I think, is a very important part. So we're in the section on medical professionals. So we have medical professionals out there. We want the advice of medical professionals. We need medical professionals to help treat medical issues, right? We'll take care of the ideological issues, but we need medical professionals to help take care of medical issues, right? Your priest, your bishop is not a medical doctor, most likely. You need a physician, right? You need therapists. But we need therapists who can be creative and try to find ways to treat this in the most helpful way. And the most helpful way would be in accordance with truth, right? The most helpful way would be consistent with our anthropology of the human person, right? The unity of the body and the soul, the teleology of sex, right? There's all these different theological and philosophical perspectives we hold, and we believe that the medical field, in combination with good theological and philosophical principles, creates the greatest human flourishing, the greatest amount of happiness. Medical science that does not follow good philosophical and theological principles will lead to more pain and suffering, right? Medical field is a tool. It is not the answer necessarily, right? It can be a tool that can use to find an answer, but it is not intrinsically in and of itself leading to human flourishing, right? But it can if it's used in the proper way. And so Archbishop Carlson is pointing this out, right? We need more doctors. We need more therapists. Engage our theology and philosophy. Don't leave your theology and philosophy at the door and go practice medicine. Integrate them, and this will be the most helpful way. And we need good people to do that, right? Most likely lay people, right? We need lay people to do that. Now, what does medical science, what do the medical professionals say about gender dysphoria? Now, if you really want to know the whole answer to that, go back to chapter 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? It's hundreds of pages on the science of gender dysphoria and transgender. So this is not to summarize, this is not to relitigate all those issues, but in a nutshell, right, if we were to take, the lesson from all of these studies, I think Aruna from Tufts Medical Center, good secular center, right, it can be believed by conservatives and liberals, hopefully it's good medicine. She points out that the transgender identity is the exact mechanism that causes people to be transgender is unknown, right? So in the brain, presumably if there was a gender identity section, it would be in the brain, not in some other organ. We don't know, right? Is it in the hypothalamus? Is it in the cortex? Is it in the what part of the hypothalamus is there, or is it all integrated, right? Is it an integrated approach within the brain? And many parts of the brain have different aspects, right? We don't know, right? We just don't know. But the doctor points out as well that there is strong support in the literature for a biological basis for gender identity. That doesn't mean that there's a strong basis for transgender. It's just saying that there is probably a part of the brain, right? There's some biological basis for this idea of understanding oneself as a male or a female. There's probably some piece in there, right? Where it is, what it is, how to find it. Is it one place or multiple? We just don't know the answer to that, right? So to say a person is transgender and we can identify this isn't something we can identify currently with the present data, right? There's only epistemological points which kind of staked out, point in a direction, those things you do as a kid with connect the dots, right? You see all these numbers and you follow the numbers and eventually you'll look at it and you go, oh, it's a flower, right? But you got it from connecting all these dots, right? So this is right, we have a bunch of dots and you say, it could be a flower, it looks like a flower. Well, it could be an elephant too, but we get some idea of what it might lean towards, right? That's possible. Now, there's still a lot unknown, right? That's a big piece of this when people kind of say, well, the science is clear. Well, science isn't clear, right? Science has a direction, right? Dr. McHugh and Mayer, again, if you recall from the past, they're very critical of the idea of a biological form of gender identity and gender dysphoria. So just keep that in mind. They said human sexuality and gender are incredibly complicated. A lot of what is presented as facts has no sturdy basis in scientific research, and we really ought to study the entire subject more rigorously. This is a very important literature review where they've reviewed the science, and people are very upset about that. But I think that's probably an accurate conclusion, though, right? People can run with that, though, and say, well, we don't know anything. Well, we know some things, right? It's not that we don't know anything, but we don't know enough, right? We don't know enough to come to absolute conclusions the way we have, right? We have certain things built into our culture now where it's like, well, this is absolutely real. It should be celebrated, and the only way to cure it is through hormones and transitioning, and when you do that, then people do great and it's wonderful, right? And but this isn't a fact, right? This is still figuring this out. And point out in this section also say we really need a prudential use of circumspection, because unknowingness can sometimes be overused. It can be an overused thing. Say, well, we don't know really what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, right? Well, we do know what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. We don't. You might not know, but experts do know, right? The same thing could be said with the transgender. Well, nobody knows. Well, you don't know. It doesn't mean nobody knows. But we do need to use prudential circumspection. Now, this is very Thomistic or Aristotelian in this approach. What is circumspection? It's kind of, again, going around the edges of good science, saying what is possible, right? So if I were to say, well, there are a lot of abnormalities, right? There's a lot of birth abnormalities. This is true, right? People aren't all born the same. Some people have certain psychological, biological abnormalities from the womb, in the development phase, chemicals in the womb, right? There's a lot of abnormalities. This is all very true. However, using prudential circumspection, nobody is born, no human is born with wings, right? There might be birth defects, but no birth defects have resulted in wings, especially functioning wings where we could fly, right? If you look at the comic books and the mutants and things like that, right? There are no mutations that allow us to be invisible or to shoot lasers out of our eyes or to be a Magneto, right? There might be many abnormalities, right? You could be born with a missing limb or extra limbs, right? And we kind of understand how and why that happens, but we don't have things where a person gives birth to a tree, right? This is not a type of abnormality which is in the range of possibility, right? So to say, well, we don't know, well, just because we don't know, we can still say, is this something which is possible, right? So the question is it possible to be born with the wrong gender identity? Is that like being born with an extra limb, or is that like being born with with wings, right? Where is this on the spectrum? And from the studies we looked at in chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it seems like there is at least a possibility that some people are born with slightly more, might have more feminine or masculine features in the brain, which might lead to some gender confusion, right? It's in the range of possibility. What is not in the range of possibility or transgender, maybe for full intersex, but a fully masculinized or fully feminized brain within transgender, right? That you would be a male, you would have a fully feminized brain, but you have a fully masculinized rest of your body. Right? That doesn't seem to be within the range of possibility, because if estrogen forms your body, your brain is part of your body. If testosterone forms your body, your brain is part of your body. So you're not going to get a feminized or masculinized brain and the opposite effect for the rest of the body. Could there be a slight variation where there's a piece of the brain, just some element that is heavily affected by it? That's, again, in the range of possibility. And this is what many of those studies in chapters 7 and 8 pointed to, right? The possibility there. Now, what type of treatments are appropriate then? Let's say you say, well, some people are gender dysphoric. There could be a biological cause for these feelings of gender dysphoria. Well, our society would now say, well, then transition them, right? Give them hormones, hormone blockers, and surgeries to transition the body. Go for it, right? Because you've identified there is perhaps a gender incongruence in the brain, therefore let's go for it, right? That's kind of our response now, right? But is this really the option, right? This is the best option. Anna here from United Kingdom, using the NHS, she works at the Gender Identity Development Services for the NHS in England. She just determined that there was something wrong 5 years after being in her field, right? And she claimed that patients were incredibly sure and clear what they wanted, but she determined what they need is not always what they wanted, right? So a lot of people come in who say they're transgender and they want transgender surgery, right? They want sex reassignment surgery. She's saying is they all want it, right? This is universal, right? We can go back to the early 1900s. People wanted it. But is it what they needed, right? So the feeling of gender incongruence is the solution to transition the body. Is that the best solution, right? Dr. Hutchinson is saying, well, maybe not, right? It's not always the best solution. He said for many detransitioners, what they claimed they needed was prolonged therapy and not sex reassignment surgery, right? So maybe some of this should be listened to. Dr. Mohammed Hassan from the Mayo Clinic, very good place, pointed out very low quality evidence suggests that sex reassignment surgery that includes hormone intervention in individuals with gender identity disorder, that's what they called it before, likely improves gender dysphoria, psychological functioning, in comorbidities, sexual function, and overall quality of life, right? There is not a lot of evidence that shows that this has helped all of these things, right? Why are we doing these surgeries and these hormone replacements? Well, to deal with the gender dysphoria, the psychological functioning, the comorbidities, the sexual functionings, and the overall quality of life. That's why we would do $100,000 worth of surgeries in order to solve these problems, and they're saying it's not, right? This is from the Mayo Clinic. The Hayes Directory, which is it's an industry benchmark for evaluating the strength of evidence for the use of various medical procedures and technologies, right? This is a well-respected industry benchmark. They said they awarded the lowest score to transgender sex reassignment surgeries, indicating statistically insignificant improvements for transgender people using hormones and surgical treatments. Right, this is 2014. It says the difference between treated and untreated study participants were very small or of unknown magnitude. Right, so you think that the surgeries and once you transition, all of these underlying issues will be resolved, and the studies have shown that very little is resolved as a result, right? If you were unhappy and dysphoric before the surgery, you will be unhappy and dysphoric largely after the surgery, right, and the treatment procedures. This is what the Hayes Directory has found, looking at, they do an evaluation of all of the studies. Now, the Brainstorm Report is an interesting one. It's a Swedish study. Within Swedish studies, there are no loss to follow-up because they keep data on a lot of things. But there's some things that the healthcare system doesn't keep data on. So it can be sometimes very accurate and other times just like everyone else. They found in their study that years since initiating hormone treatments was not significantly related to the likelihood of mental health treatments. This is a 2020 study, very highly cited too by the transgender community. So it's saying not many positive outcomes of hormone treatments. They did say when you have hormone treatments mixed with surgery, there is a decreased stress level, right? So as time goes on, the stress and anxiety, self-assessed quality of life is increased over time when you have both hormones and surgery, right? So this was very highly cited, right? Because it's just, you say, well, see, if you go all the way, look, better outcomes, right? So this is when people say, look at the studies all show that sex reassignment is beneficial, right? And it's good. Right? They'll often, if you say, well, show me a study, they might say the Brainstorm study, right? First they have to Google it, but then the Brainstorm study. But after this was put out there, for peer review. The results came in, editor-in-chief responded saying, the results demonstrated no advantage of surgery in relation to a subsequent mode or anxiety disorders related to healthcare visits or prescriptions or hospitalizations following suicide attempts in that comparison. So the pointing out is after their study was released, the peer review was that it was not, their conclusions were not accurate. As a result, Brainstorm changed his conclusion, right? So it says, well, in light of the points raised, changed the conclusion, right? So they were looking at somewhat subjective elements of this. So again, usually Swedish reports are very good when they're looking at objective standards. This was looking at subjective standards, and there was universal acceptance, right? The critics and the writers of the study, they all agreed, yeah, you're right. It's the results were inconclusive in terms of that, but it's not a lot of positive results, right? There was only moderate benefit to begin with, and then after critique, they say even less. Now the DSM, they point out that children who don't go through puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones identify with the opposite sex, meaning their sex, 70 to 98% of the time, and 50 to 88% for females. So they desist, right? They desist in their gender dysphoria by the end of puberty. For males, up to 98% of the time, and for females, up to 88% of the time. Now you say, wow, it's the DSM, right? If you're saying, well, this person's a homophobe or something, a transphobe, well, this is the DSM, right? And so this is coming from all of the therapists contribute their statistics to the database, and this is the result of national data on the topic, right? So this is the DSM. Dr. Paul McHugh also points out that sex reassignment surgeries do not address the root issue causing clinical distress and makes it harder for the mind to accept reality, right? Again, a bit more of a conclusion, but when he looks at the DSM, that's what it points to, right? You're just not dealing with the underlying issues. Why is sex reassignment surgery not solving these problems? Well, because they weren't the problem. They weren't the primary problem to begin with. Okay, so for youth, it seems leave them alone, right? Just leave the kids alone. With adults, it's not really sure. We don't really know the cause. We don't really know the best way to treat it. Now, if we were to say that, we can then say, well, how about regret? All these people have now had these surgeries. Do they regret having these procedures and these surgeries? Again, Swedish study points out that only 2.2% of people who have received the surgeries between 1960 and 2010 requested to have them reversed, right? Only it's a very small amount of people who reverse it, right? What it doesn't take into effect, though, is people who have died, right? So people who have died don't do the surveys. So, with high rates of suicide among transgender people, even after surgery, if the most unhappy people committed suicide, then the number 2.2 might be higher, right? If it's like kill myself or detransition, they might choose to kill themselves, right? And then they're not part of the statistics, but it's still pretty low, right? It's pretty low. Amsterdam study between 1965 to 1995 reported that over 75% of people report feeling happier, liberated, and more at ease in their bodies, right? So that's a fairly positive 75%. They found that only 2% of patients expressed regret attempting or attempted suicide preoperatively, and only 0.5% postoperatively. So those are very good statistics. And another study, 6% of postoperative patients reported regarding surgery. Again, not that high. 6% is significant, but not that high. Now, what's important, I'd like to point out here for regret. These are good studies, right? These are good statistics. No reason to doubt any of the research methods or anything like that. Here's one issue with it. If you look at the dates, 1995, 2010. This is really before a lot of the surge, right? The transgender surge, which has gone up astronomically, particularly among transgender youth, right? This is not really taking into consideration this new trend of teenage girls who consider themselves transgender, right? These people are not included in any of these studies. This is the people in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. They had it hard, and it wasn't popular and very challenging. So to think that they, and very few people got the surgeries, very few people had access to this. As you look back, if you want to look back to chapter 5, I talk about this. 2,000 people applied for treatments, and 1 or 2% received it, right? So when very few people receive these treatments, they're very strict. They first rule out all the psychological elements. Of these people, there's very little regret. Well, this in some ways makes some sense, right? If we think of the previous 7 years or so, well, this is a bit different, right? Now you show up and you're a teenager, after 2 visits, they're giving you hormone blockers, and you sign it, and within 3 months your breasts are removed and you've transitioned in 3 months' time, right? Very easy, anyone can do it, right? Going to be very different results, different numbers, right? Just rationally speaking, when it was very difficult to get this done, the people who finally managed to do it are going to be far less likely to regret it than people who can just spontaneously decide, I'm going to get this, and it's going to obviously lead to much higher regret rates, right? This doesn't mean that there are not people with valid gender dysphoria, maybe not even saying there's people with valid gender dysphoria who can benefit from these surgeries, but it's clear to say that not at the rates in which we see now, right? I think that's fair. Other issues with this is that we see, like in detransitioning support groups, there's over 19,000 members currently in 2021, right? So this is very high rate. So there's a lot of reason to suggest that some people who are transitioning are not pleased with it, right? And not everyone who transitions does so medically, and there might not be statistics on this, right? If I said I'm a female, and all of a sudden I call myself a female name, and I put on female clothing, and maybe I change my license or something like this, right? I would not be included in the medical statistics, right? If I say, I'm non-binary, and then 2 years later I say I'm not non-binary, I'm not included in these statistics, but I might be in a detransitioning support group, right? So it's easy to see that those numbers are probably much higher today. Not that the studies were wrong, but things have changed so quickly. That's probably not accurate as of this current moment. Another issue is cognitive dissonance, which is an important one. Anytime when you're saying, there's a 99% happiness result of doing this. Well, really, there's not a 99% happiness for anything, right? For people who buy a Tesla, there is not a 99% happiness rate, right? So what we call buyer's remorse, right? You feel, right? You buy it, and you're excited and you're into it, and then it wanes, right? The feeling wanes, and then the reality of the financial cost kicks in, and maybe you're not as happy as you were the first couple days of having it, and there can be some regret, right? This is with absolutely everything, right? You go out to a nice meal, and there's a good feeling, and then you get the bill, and there's buyer's remorse, right? It's just part of human life. Did I make the right decision? So, same thing with a tattoo and things like this, right? You're excited in the moment. You always wanted it. You get it, and then it's not quite what you hoped, right? You don't quite feel the same way when you're done. Right? A 2014 study in the UK pointed out 83% of people who received plastic surgeries claim that they would not repeat the decision if they had the opportunity, right? Even when it's completely successful, even when there's good outcomes, and few adverse side effects usually with cosmetic surgery, 83% people regret it. Why? Well, because they thought that when they got this or that procedure, whatever it was, they would feel incredibly different, better. And they feel the same, right? Or it didn't have the effect that they thought it would have, right? This is just cognitive dissonance, right? So this is going to be part of it as well, right? Even when we look at the John Money case with the boy who was turned into a girl, right? Right up until the point that the young boy committed suicide, they were still reporting back to their doctors that everything was good and successful, right? Up until the moment that you killed yourself, you were happy, right? People lie to their doctors. People lie, right? Especially when you have gone very far out of your way to get this. And then when your doctor says, well, how you doing? You go, good, right? And then when you leave, you go, I'm miserable, right? There's some element of this which is just going to not be true, right? Another important part of this is high loss to follow-up. And I brought this up before, but I bring it up again. People can lie with statistics, right? And I try to be careful not to lie with statistics here and to show both sides in this book, but it's the high loss to follow-up is important. So a German study from Essen used 2018. They came up with a study. They found that 73.9% of transsexual people surveyed post-operatively claimed greater satisfaction in life, right? So 73.4%. So this can be another study that is claimed by gender ideology people and people pushing for transgender surgeries. Look at the percentage of happy people. Look, this is a big study, 610 people, right? Look at people are happier, right? So why are you getting in the way of other people's happiness? But this can be a matter of lying with statistics, right? So if you say 610 people, okay, received sex reassignment surgeries between 1995 and 2015. So of the 610 people, well, then that would be 73%, 74% of them would be have a greater satisfactory in life, right? That's what it says, 74% of the 610 people. No, right? Only 156 people of the 610 responded to the survey from their doctor, right? And of the 156 people, only 75% of people responded positively, that it went well. So of that, only 117 people said it went well. So of the 610 people, 117 said, that's great, it went well. Okay, that's not 74%, that's 21%. So do you want to say then that only 21% of people are happy, had successful surgeries? Well, we can't really say that accurately either, right? We could make the claim, but we just don't know about the 400 and something other people, right? They didn't respond to the survey. There's a loss to follow-up. The follow-up did not follow through. It can be what's some have claimed, and I think validly so, is the result of this study should say results inconclusive, because less than 50% of people responded, right? When you get a less than 50% response rate, results are inconclusive, right? That's honest. Now, if you were to say, do you think people who didn't respond are more favorable of the surgery or less favorable of their surgery? Right? I know it's a bit of speculation, but people like Walt Heyer, who's a detransitioner, he points out, the reason why, if you're ecstatic about your surgery, this went great, right? This is fantastic, and your doctor reaches out to you, and you're so happy with the surgery, you would probably respond back to your doctor, right, and tell him how great it was. Why wouldn't you? Because you don't feel that great about it, right? Your doctor goes, how's the surgery? How did everything go? You feel satisfied with life? And you're not. You go, put it on the table. Maybe I'll answer it later, right? If this person has positively changed your life in a phenomenal, fantastic way, right? You now have gone from suicidal to you have a sense of purpose in being. You're going to ignore your doctor's request for follow-up, right? Probably not. Why would you not follow up? One, if you've committed suicide. Two, it's just not what you hoped it was going to be, right? Three, you're just busy, right? I guess. But it probably leans more to the negative than the positive, right? I guess that would be the claim, which I think has some value in it. Could you then say what percentage? That's pure speculation, what percentage, but it might lean more towards the 71. It might lead more to the 21% satisfaction rate than the 74% satisfaction rate, right? That might be accurate. Other complications with reporting. This is a big one. A lot of times when these more recent studies, right, they're often interviewing people who've only had the surgery a short amount of time, right? So Johanna Olson Kennedy is kind of notorious for this in some of hers. It's like you're doing these surgeries, and then 3 to 5 years later you come up with a follow-up survey that says, high rates of happiness, 99% rates of happiness. It's like, well, your study is less than 5 years old, so some of the people you're interviewing to see if they're happy, it's months after they had the surgery, right? Somebody 3 months after the surgery is still in a honeymoon phase. This is not long-term follow-up. Long-term follow-up is much more useful information than short-term follow-up, right? A lot of these other studies I used earlier that had low regret rates, right? What you could say about them is at least they're accurate, right? So if you have long-term follow-up from 1960 to 2010 and you publish it in 2015, right? The most new would be 5 years, but some of this, you're going back decades. So you need longer-term follow-up studies, right? You can't just look at something that's less than 5 years old and say that everyone's happy. Not necessarily, right? Back to the 60 Minutes interview where Leslie Stahl interviews Daisy. She said, after every step I take, every milestone feels like $1 million. But when I got top surgery, I was elated. When I changed my name, I was elated. But when everything that I had set out was done, I still felt incomplete, right? This is the other part of the problem is, when this is all done in stages, people can say, oh, I'm happier. And you think that the next thing will make you really happy. And then when everything is finally done, you realize you're still the same person as you were before you began, right? So any studies that are done in transition, it might not be accurate either, because they are living in hope, right? And once you get to the end, there's no more hope, right? And then you get despair if it didn't do what you hoped it would do, and despair leads to terrible things, right? The Aggressive Research Intelligence Facility from Birmingham uses the NHS, England's studies. Their results were that none of the studies provided conclusive evidence that gender reassignment is beneficial for patients. It found that most research was poorly designed and skewed the results in favor of physical sex changing sex. There is no evaluation of whether other treatments or long-term counseling might help transsexuals, or whether their gender confusion might lessen over time. Right? This is, again, part of the issue. Right? You're saying, well, these are our studies for sex reassignment surgery, which are usually fairly incomplete and not well designed, because you're requiring people to be honest, right? If you say, are you happier now before? Oh, I'm happier now, right? It's very subjective, right? It's often very subjective. And we're not looking at, could therapy be more useful? Like, we've assumed that medical transitioning is the best response, and then everything has followed from there, right? Which is, good. If we really want to find a solution, we should look at all of the options and look at the outcomes from all of the options, not just adopt this one method. Right? Okay. Here I think I'm going to stop and move into the health outcomes section in section 2. So I hope this was good, and we'll move on from here in section 2.